right, let's kick things off here and just want to welcome everyone to the broadcast tonight. This is our May virtual leadership seminar, and I'm Bob Strasberg, and on behalf of the entire Christian Business Board, I want to welcome you to tonight's broadcast. We are so grateful to have Pete Baran of Blueneck Business Mechanics with us tonight to talk about innovation and change in business according to God's plan for our businesses. So we're just really grateful that Pete's willing to come on and share his wisdom and experience with us. Just as a way of getting us kicked off here, I want to be able to tell you a little bit about Peter, but we have been running this series of events over the past year and a half or so as an extension of the Christian Business Board's mission to develop leaders in business who have a Christian business mindset. People who want to serve God in their businesses and their ministries with whatever professional capacity God has given to them. So we've had a great series of speakers here. Pete is going to no doubt give us another great presentation tonight. We're looking forward to that. Just to tell you a little bit about Pete, I had a chance to hear him on a Canadian Christian Business Board presentation a couple of weeks ago, and Pete really rocked it. And so we invited him to come on here, and he's agreed to repeat that performance. Christian Business Board has developed a partnership with the CCBF, and we're really grateful for the support that we've gained from them. And we're hoping to continue that partnership with our brothers and sisters across the border in Canada. And Pete has a wide range of experience in business and in ministry as well. He has, as he was introduced on the session that I heard him before on, Don Moore of the CCBF said that Pete started very early in his father's business, sweeping floors to earn candy money. So he's been an entrepreneur for a very long time. Through his career, he moved through senior leadership positions in Fortune 500 companies across Canada, such as Canadian Tire, Mark's Work Warehouse, IBM and HP, Fujitsu Consulting and CGI. And he's worked with Alberta Energy and on the board of the BC Land Titles and Survey Authority. He's had his own consulting practice for some time now, and he's worked with a wide variety of corporate clients across Canada, I'm guessing probably across the world. He works with all kinds of business owners from small to medium to large organizations, and just helping them to be successful in whatever it is that they're trying to accomplish, and also trying to show them God's way for organizing and executing their businesses. Pete has a degree from the University of British Columbia in Commerce. He's got a certificate in high performance leadership from Cornell University and a certificate in process improvement from Villanova University. Pete's also the current board chair of the Canadian Christian Business Federation. So it's my great pleasure to turn things over to Pete here. I do want to offer a word of prayer here just to bless Pete as he leads us in here. So Father God, we're just grateful for our time together tonight, and we just pray that you'll just give Pete a heart and hands and mind to be able to lead us through a great discussion of change and innovation. And we just pray that you'll bless everyone who's here, and that we'll just get so much out of this, and that you'll enable us to lead our businesses, our ministries, our organizations according to your plan for salvation, and to be able to use the skills, the opportunities and experiences that we have to bless other people in your name. So Pete, I just want to turn it over to you in Jesus' name, and let it rip.
Don or Bob, thanks very much. I really appreciate you inviting me here this evening and getting a chance to talk about change and innovation. Really important topics to me. I have been involved in change projects for many, many years, and just wanted to kind of point out that 5 years ago, we probably would never have been having this kind of a meeting where we are able to not only reach out to people all over a geography and share concepts that are God-inspired concepts and things that we can bring back in their business and do good work with. But, you know, we also have this ability to now have this thing echo throughout the digital world for days, weeks, and months later, as people who are going to watch this thing offline and wonder why they weren't online to ask their questions. But, it's important to know that change can be very good and very positive. And change can be something that, more importantly, is not that just God tolerates, but is part of God's plan for us moving forward. So I want to talk about that in my presentation here. I'm hoping everybody can see the screen in front of me. And I'm going to lift up a cup of coffee from time to time because it's getting late in the day and I have this baseline requirement of caffeine to keep me going. So if you see a striped mug appear in the screen, that's me just continuing to fuel myself up for the evening. I've been involved with change probably since I was a kid, to be honest with you. I was never one of those guys that just stopped at asking the question why something was the way it was. I was always looking for why it wasn't something else, and asking the question, well, why not? And so for me, it was a really honest topic to be asked to do when I was asked to do it up in Canada, and very much something that's passionate and close to me when I'm talking to you here in the US. Innovation and change. I'm going to talk about something that seems to be unrelated, but it isn't. When I was out of university, I took a college course. And the college course was aptly named Epistemology and Metaphysics. So, hang on, let me bring this back. Epistemology is separating justified belief from just mere opinion. By the way, I think it's a topic that ought to be taught in grade school these days. We seem to be having a lot of problems trying to stick with what's real and what's just an opinion. And also metaphysics, which is trying to figure out what the nature of reality and existence is. So let me just back this up a little bit. My college professor at the time was just an amazing young man, very talented at what he did. And he would have a 1-hour lecture in the evening. And every one of those lectures he would start by posing an interesting question. And then he would start to spin a story out that would go on for about 50 minutes. And we would get increasingly confused and unsure about our own concepts and opinions and our own beliefs in reality. And then what he would do in the last 10 minutes is he would pull the string and bring all the ideas together. And you'd have an aha moment every time. It was an amazing course. And be honest with you, I've never been in another course ever in my entire life that was as awe-inspiring as that course in epistemology and metaphysics. Now, what has that got to do with change and innovation? Well, first of all, I want to talk about what I learned from that course, other than reality is something that we need to question from time to time, and beliefs are things we need to examine from time to time. But for me, the key thing I learned was that as my first college course that I took, is it got me to question what I expected reality to be from day to day. And you learn some key things here. One of them is that, hang on, keeps rolling forward. First of all, we find comfort and safety in believing that the world is going to be the same way today as tomorrow as we understand it today. And I'm going to keep pushing this back to where I'm supposed to be here because it seems to be moving on me. The second thing is that, and I'm really sorry about this, the second thing is that change is, the expectations of change is that it's going to move all the time. And the reality that we want is based on stability and comfort that we can't really expect from day to day, but it's something that we seek as human beings. But change is a natural thing that God expects us to do and evolve for a number of reasons I'm going to talk about. Now, change itself is risky business. I've been watching studies since 1982 on change initiatives in organizations. First of all, I can tell you that the success rate of those numbers have not changed in the 30 to 40 years I've been watching these reports. 1/3 roughly of all change initiatives just fail. They just don't work. The other thing that's really disheartening about change is that even another third don't work as well as expected. So they may complete, but they fall short of the expectations of the result you wanted from the change. So you would think this is a really dangerous thing, and it is. When you move into change, you are moving into an area that is fraught with problems. It's one of the reasons as human beings that we really do want to have stability and comfort and something to be the same tomorrow as it is today, and for today to be the same as it was yesterday, because change often doesn't work. Now, here's the really sad thing. In 40 years of watching these reports, the same half dozen or so reasons for failure of change keep coming up over and over and over again, as if we've somehow all culturally developed an Alzheimer's disease and we can't remember why change fails. But the reality is it's really well documented. So here's kind of the key reasons that most most change exercises fail completely. Number one on the list, and here's why it's really important for the people on this seminar to listen to this. The number one reason that change initiatives fail is a lack of leadership. People often think that if they can conceive of something being different, they just have to make it happen and somehow magically it's going to occur and they don't need to step into that space. I actually had one new senior vice president who moved into the chief operating officer role of a multi-billion-dollar company, and I was working with his predecessor, and he had some great ideas for changing up the purchasing division, which was required to purchase about $500 million of goods a year from all over the world. And I looked at him and I said, Rick, I said, brilliant ideas to come into the job with. How are you planning to roll out these changes? Now, by way of background, there are 50 different purchasing groups in this company, 50. Each of them had between 10 and 12 people in them. Each of them looked at a completely different product line that was moving through the business. There were 500 different purchasing locations all around the world. Logistics was a nightmare. Dealing with all their suppliers, some of them they'd been dealt with for 30 years and some of them they'd be dealing with for 3 days. And his answer to me was he looked puzzled and he said, well, that's easy. I'm just going to write a memo and send it out to everybody because I'm the COO and they'll listen to me. Absolutely avoiding the need to be a leader in a fairly large change in a very large organization. Needless to say, it didn't work. For change to happen, you have to step in as a leader and show people the way through it. Second reason is people are just not bought in. They just aren't committed to the change. Often we think about change as things we can control. The reality is a lot of change involves things we can't control. There are lots of external dependencies we have to manage and external stakeholders in a change. Number 4, just lack communications, coordination, and teamwork. People just not working together. Bad planning, lack of skilled resources. Often when you're making a change, people forget that the reason you're not already doing it is because you don't know how to do it. So if you're making a change, sometimes you have to take stock of what you're good at and what you know how to do and understand there may be gaps that you'll have to bring in some experts or hire some different people into those jobs to be able to make the change happen. I've got a small business client here who is trying to make a change in his front order sales desk, and they're trying to put some automation in the front, and they're dealing with people who have never before worked with anything other than paper order forms. And he's just trying to put it in without training them. And guess what? It's not working. So we're going back to the square one, saying we've got to take a look at what people are good at and either hire the right skills or train them or give them the skills they need to be able to make the change. The other insidious one here is number 7. We all know what we know. We also are pretty good at making a list of what we don't know. What we always get caught up with in changes is not knowing what we don't know. Think about that. You can't know what you don't know, but if you're moving into change exercises, this is where you can get caught absolutely blindsided. And if you're looking through your change, you've got to keep your eyes open for things that you've never expected before, because they will happen in change. You take a look at, I'm going to use Moses as an example. I mean, he came up against the Red Sea, and he didn't know that he was going to be leading the Israelites up against a huge body of water, and he didn't know what was going to happen. He didn't know what he didn't know. But his strong relationship with God and the faith in what he was doing got him through it, because he recognized that something had to happen and he couldn't do it. He needed a different skill level than he was capable of delivering in that moment. And that skill and that capability came from God. The other thing is is that when you're making change, if you continually tweak what you're doing as you go along, you never tend to finish it, and you tend to mess it up as you're going along. You make changes in sprints. You make a change, you stand on that change, you evaluate where you are, and then you make your next step. You don't keep changing things along the way, it'll break. Those are the top 8 for 40 years, keep turning up in every report. So with all these problems and difficulties in making changes, why the heck would anybody want to do this? So there are some really good reasons to make and initiate a change. And I'm going to do a little quote from one of my favorite guys, Will Rogers, who said, even if you're on the right track, you'll get run over if you just sit there. I'm going to give you a 2022 version of that saying, which is, even if you're on the right track and heading in the right direction, if you're moving too slow, the train is still going to hit you. It is important to embrace change. So there are some good reasons to do some change. So let me give you some top 5 for me. One of them is, and this is the easiest one to understand, is you got to make a change because you got a problem that you have to fix. So just like that small company I talked about, they were having problems with their paper processes because people, even though they were used to paper forms, continually made errors and omissions on those paper forms, and it caused problems in the business. And the business kept growing and the problems kept multiplying. So they need to make some changes. Okay. That's what we call an adaptive change. Something's changed, we adapt, we move on, we fix the problem. The second one is we're responding to a threat. Now, we've all had to do that recently. COVID, for example, and lockdowns and supply chain problems have all created a threat to our organizations that we've had to respond to in order to survive. I've looked at also many churches across North America, and there were very different responses to that threat of COVID in their congregation, and also the government orders to shut down gatherings for a time. And that's what's called reactive change. So again, just like the first one, something has happened that we did not initiate that we have to adapt to. One more serious than the other. So the third one is now moving into something more proactive. So as a business person or as a church leader, you see a new opportunity. And that opportunity allows you to make a transition from where you are today to some new state. And this is a proactive reason to change, to say there's an opportunity here. In my own church here in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, there was an opportunity years ago to open a mission in India. And money was raised, missionaries were sent, and thousands of people came to Christ as a result of that opportunity. In your own business, it could be something as simple as, well, there's a new product line that you could carry, or you have a new idea for a new service, or all of a sudden there's a building that comes available in a new location, or some amazing person in a different city wants to work with you and wants to open up an office for you. These are all opportunities that you might want to pursue. The fourth one is an innovative change. So this is about creating an advantage, not just taking advantage of an opportunity, but creating one. So, for example, one of the biggest ones in business across the world is changing things from a product to a service. A little company called Dollar Shave Club. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of those guys. They started off with looking at Gillette, who sold razors and razor blades for a living, and dominated the entire shaving industry with razors and razor blades. And the Dollar Shave Club said, you know what? We're just going to have something totally different. What we're going to do is, instead of making people go to a store like a pharmacy and then get somebody to unlock those little cupboards or shelves to be able to get my razor, which is always irritating, we're just going to sell it as a subscription. Every month you're going to get a pack of clean razors, and if you need a new razor blades, and it costs you a fixed amount every month, we put it on your credit card. You don't even worry about it. They come in the mail. In 6 years, that turned into a $25 million a year business, and then grew after that. And that was just converting a product into a service or a subscription. The last reason you might want to change is a complete realignment of your business because the one you're in isn't working. I'm going to give you the name of a little company that's been around for a couple of 100 years called Nintendo. Now, we all know that as a gaming company right now, but that's not how Nintendo was. In the early 1960s, Nintendo was a conglomerate Japanese company that owned everything from playing cards to instant rice to short-term hotels to taxi cabs. And one of their line divisions was the playing card division, which was maxed out in the United States. And somebody in Nevada convinced Nintendo that the US market for playing cards was an untapped market, ripe with growth. And so Nintendo bought the playing card division of this company in Nevada, sent over and hired a general manager for the division, who figured out the playing card division in the United States was just as saturated as it was in Japan. A little bit of a disappointment. However, this little tiny division that really had no prospects had one really interesting thing, which was a general manager who had an open heart to all people. One of the people in his company, when he was working late, he bumped into the maintenance man and janitor of the office. So here's a general manager deciding to spend time and listen to the story of this maintenance man and this janitor. And he said, I don't understand why your guys in there in the playing card division. He said, electronic games is where it's at. And if you think back in the 1960s, there wasn't much of an electronics game business at all. There's things called, that evolved into things called Pong, if you remember that. Wasn't even Pac-Man back then. And so he showed him this little Pong game that he had built with a computer. And he loved the idea and sold the idea to Nintendo as something that, as an expansion of the playing card business. And by the early 1970s, Nintendo was shifting and selling off all of their other assets and plowing millions and millions of dollars into the gaming industry. Nintendo is now arguably the world leader in electronic gaming and is worth billions of dollars as a result. This is an example of a complete realignment of your business that is a transformational change. And if you look at the word transformational, it's also the word that we often use when we describe what happens when Jesus enters into our own life. We often experience a complete transformation of what we're doing. My own story, by the way, was nothing short of transformational. God was pursuing me all my life, and I was very stubborn. I grew up in a non-Christian household, and God and the Bible was not something that was part of our everyday life, if our life at all. And people kept coming into my life who were strong Christians, and I was always curious, and they were always kind and intelligent people, and I kind of liked them. And in 2008, as a result of a number of events, I accepted God into my life and became a devout Christian here. And a few years later, I decided to in prayer, I looked at God and I said, I've invited you into all parts of my life, and it's worked out very well. And I've never invited you into my business life. And I had a pretty good business going with some fairly large companies. And I've always thought, them to be, how do I say this? Not a highly ethical organization. So I don't know if any of you have worked with Fortune 500s, but they are ripe with people that are not particularly high value people by and large. Occasionally, and by exception, that you can always find. But I turned to God and I said, I'm turning my business life over to you. Show me what you would like me to do with it. Well, the transformation started pretty much the next week. All of my existing business clients and contracts over a 4-week period all came to an end. All of them. Every last contract. And I was sitting there in my office making phone calls to try and renew contracts. None of them would renew. They weren't interested anymore. I'd phoned people I'd done work with in the past. They weren't interested. 20 years of doing this work, and all of a sudden there was not one stitch of work for my hundreds and hundreds of people that I knew very well over the years and done many, many projects with over the years. And I was wondering what had happened. What had I done? And I had this little whispering that God was really telling me, he said, I need you to rely on me, not on yourself. And I'm going to remove everything that you had in your life your business life as a result of your own effort. And everything that comes forward from now on you will know is from me and me alone. About 2 months later, I got my first client that I had never met before, who was head of Christian stewardship services in Toronto, in a city that I wasn't working in, through a fellow that I was in a prayer group with. And ever since then, good people who needed help kept coming my way. And my business was built up, thank God, and because of God, in a completely different and transformative way. True story. So sometimes change is necessary for transformation to occur. So what has the Bible got to say about change? What is our role in leading change? And what skills do we need as leaders to be able to lead change? So I'm going to kind of lean into a couple of these topics. So what does the Bible teach us about change? First of all, the Bible teaches us that even if the need for change comes directly from God himself, we as human beings are going to struggle with making that change. And if you doubt that, read the story of Moses. Moses said, when God called him to save the Israelites from and call them out of Egypt, In Exodus 3:11, he said, I am nobody. He fought God and said, I'm not the right guy. You're making a mistake. And he said, I can't speak. I'm too old. I haven't been to Egypt for 40 years. You're picking the wrong guy. And this is God speaking directly through the burning bush to Moses. Now, we often say, well, once I get a clear sign from God, I'll be able to do this. Just think of that story for a second. God is going to tell you what to do. And even when he does, we have to be prepared. I had a good friend of mine that lived his adult life on what he called the 15-minute principle, which is that he would pray every day. And then he followed prayer with meditation, where he would just listen for God. And God would sometimes give him little bits of wisdom. But he said, every once in a while, I would get a clear direction to do something that made no sense, but it was a clear direction to do something. He said, I learned that I had 15 minutes to start to obey God. Otherwise, the opportunity would start to fade. And Scott lived an amazing life as a result, and did some amazing things for people and brought people to God and into faith with God because he listened to those promptings. Second thing is, God will always be alongside of us to do what he asks us to do. We are not going to be alone in this. Joshua 9:1, have I not commanded you, be strong and of courage and not afraid or dismayed, for the Lord thy God is with you as you go. Pretty clear. Third one is, change is necessary. Necessary, even when the core purpose of why you're doing it doesn't change. And for me, the biggest transformation that brought me into belief of God was reading the New Testament after reading the Old Testament. Because if you do that, the message of Jesus Christ just stands out like a sore thumb. It is so radical and refreshing and different and amazing. It's really hard to ignore. Even though there were Israelites and there was the Pharisees, and they were all trying hard to live a good, pious, godly life. Despite that, something had to change, because we as a people at that point were getting it wrong. Jesus appeared as a radical teacher, challenging the establishment in the teaching, upsetting carts. Here is a guy that, even when things seemed to be leaning heavily towards belief in God, he went and upset things because the change was necessary, even though the people that were there were trying to follow God and his teachings and his word. Fourth thing is that the world by nature is transient and impermanent. 2 Corinthians 4:16-18, for the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. The Bible speaks consistently and constantly about the need for change and the need for us to continue to move towards a more perfect relationship and understanding in God. So let me kind of go through a little bit about this. The pace of the world change is definitely accelerating. So we take a look at what's happening. First of all, we look at population growth. When I was a kid, there were probably about 2.5 billion people on the earth. By next year, 2023, they're expecting the 8 billionth person to be on this earth. 2.5 to 8 billion people. That's a lot of change being driven by the need for more food, for more housing, for more education, for more of everything. God's thrown a bit of a curve at us with COVID, which caused a lot of change in our world, and it's upset a lot of things. It's upset things in the supply chains, in shipping, in the way that we move goods and services around the world, the way we look at manufacturing, globalization. Climate change has happened, changes to government, rules, regulations. Things have changed in justice. Things have changed in social networking. Technology has changed. Green technology has come on the wave, and even churches and the way we worship has changed, and is continuing to change at an alarming pace. Something that we have never, as a human species, seen this volume of change in this short a period of time. And yet it's happening. Now, we can attempt to pump the brakes on this stuff, but the reality is that if we truly believe that God is in control of all things, then he is making this happen as well. And there's a reason for it. Change is necessary to realize God's plan for us. Philippians 3:12, not that I have already obtained this or am already perfect, but I press on to make it my own because Christ Jesus has made me his own. We need to change to become something new and reborn in God. I mean, that's the whole purpose of evangelism, make the whole world understand, right? The good news of the gospel. We need to change to become better followers of Christ. And we need to change to be able to discover what God needs us to do as individuals, as human beings, as business owners, as leaders of organizations. He is asking us to do things, and we need to change to be able to do it. Doesn't mean we throw out what we know how to do, but we take what we know how to do and we build on it and we take the next step. It is also important to realize God's plans that he has for our businesses. To invite God to transform your business life, just like I asked him to transform mine. By the way, since I told that story, I hear so many other Christian business leaders tell me their story of business transformation, and they're almost always as shocking as mine. The second one is to experience God's blessing as growth and prosperity. Sometimes we hang on to businesses and they're okay, not trusting that God has a bigger plan for us. We often think that, being more prosperous and being blessed by God's prosperity is against God's plan in some ways. We as business leaders sometimes feel embarrassed about that, and it's silly. Money is a resource. In fact, I had a good friend of mine who said that the discussion of money appears in the Bible more than twice as often as discussions of love. And why is that? Because money is nothing more than a resource that can be used for good or used for evil. And God blesses us with resources that we use for good. And we want to be able to have those resources. We want to be able to grow our businesses and our communities and the people that we employ and the people we work with in such a way that we can bless them with our blessings. Third of all, it's important to impact the world around us and be a light, to be that shining light on the hill for others. I came to God not because somebody stood on a street corner and clobbered me with a Bible verse. I came to God because people around me had a light in them that was undeniably different than all the other people that I was dealing with in the secular world. There was a calmness, there was a certainty, there was a gentleness, there was a kindness, there was a knowingness and an intelligence to the people I met over the years who called themselves Christ followers that were, in the end, irresistible. We need to be able to change, to be able to impact those around us by being a light in our business. Now, when we make changes, there are 4 large change blockers. There's a lovely fellow that I follow out of Europe who had a huge change management practice, and he's moved on and done something else after doing it for many years. I also got a chance about 30 years ago to work with a pioneer in change management concepts, techniques, and strategies, a lady by the name of Dell Langdon. And out of all that work, there are four things that block change from happening, either in ourselves, but more importantly, if you look at trying to make changes in our business, what kind of things block us? Number one is misunderstanding. If people don't really understand what the change is, it's too complicated, it's too theoretical, it's too far out there, they can't understand it, they're going to make stuff up in their own head about it. And that gets in the way. The second one is there's no clear reason that they can understand for the change. I don't understand why I'm changing, right? Everything seems to be working okay. Why change? And remember, most people want comfort and stability in their life. Most people don't naturally welcome change for change's sake unless there is a reason that they understand. The third largest change blocker is skepticism. They look at it and go, well, that sounds nice, Pete, but I don't think that's going to work. So skepticism becomes that change blocker. You know, if you take a look at Moses and the Israelites, there were many times where, God through Moses and Aaron commanded the Israelites to do things. And there was massive skepticism and complaining, and this isn't going to work. We're all going to die of starvation and thirst in the desert. I mean, here are these people that are liberated from slavery, and yet and walked through the Red Sea as God parted the water, and yet sat there with skepticism that maybe this isn't going to work. That's how strong skepticism can be in blocking change. The last one is that there's a perceived lack of necessity. So these are all blockers to change, but they're also tools of Satan to block change in our life and bring God into our businesses. And so we need to be able to take these things and learn how to deal with them. And the best way to learn how to deal with them is to look into the Bible and say, well, how did great prophets and how did Christ himself deal with these things? Well, there are some pretty strong strategies that actually work pretty darn good. So I'm going to talk about how Christ's message embodied the four antidotes to those four blockers. Number one, you got to be very clear as to what you're asking people to do. So the what for Jesus is he wants to bring us into a reconciled relationship with God, a personal relationship with God. That's the what. It's simple, it's clear, it's understandable. The second thing is why? Why would we want a personal relationship with God that's reconciled and, without sin? The why is so that we can have an eternal life in the kingdom of heaven, a pearl that is so beautiful that we would sell everything we have to experience it. That's a quote from the Bible. So now this is the why you want to have a reconciled relationship with God. Okay, that sounds pretty darn good. The third thing is explaining how. And the how from God is so simple. Turn away from evil, accept Jesus's gift of salvation, and to live according to God's commandments. Pretty much it, right? And when do you have to do this? Well, pretty much now, because there's statements all through the Bible that says you never know when the knock on the door is going to come. So don't put it off, do it now. And I already said I grew up in a non-Christian household. My dad was a active resistor to belief in God, and part of the reason was that he grew up in a very poor family in the prairies during the last part of the Depression, second oldest of 10 kids, and watched as this family had nothing and starved many times and couldn't have meals, that his parents devoutly tithe every week. And on top of that, there were carpetbaggers that came through the communities who were, non-educated, non-literate people. They were, this community was Ukrainian immigrants that had escaped the oppression of the Tsar. History seems to repeat itself, doesn't it? And these carpetbaggers were saying, well, if you want to go to heaven, you have to buy a deed in heaven. It costs money. And so they would take all their life savings to buy a deed in heaven. And he watched this happen, and he watched his family get further and further into poverty, the point that he was farmed out to another family and wasn't able to go to school because his own family couldn't afford to feed him, clothe him, or send him to school. So his story changed when he moved in with us and he was dying of cancer. My mom had passed away a few years before, and we brought him into our home to look after him. And he was in a hospital one night. And we thought, and the doctors thought that was it. And so when we came to visit him and do the watch, he was getting himself dressed and he was terrified and he wanted out of the hospital as soon as possible. And the nurses couldn't stop him. He was just terrified. And we got him home. And I said, well, what happened? And very clearly he said, I saw Satan. He said, he's wandering the hall looking for souls like me. And he said, I'm not ready to go. And it turned out that I had a cousin who was a pastor. He said, get Ed in here. I want to talk to him about God. In the last few weeks of his life, he learned about Jesus. He accepted the gospel as the truth, and he turned his life over to Christ, and he died a Christ follower. So it's never too early and it's never too late, but you have to remove the reasons for procrastination. You got to do it now. And for your own business, if you're going to make a change and you're going to lead that change, there's no time like the present. Things I've learned about leading change, and I've done a lot of that over my life. I've led multi-million-dollar transformational projects in companies. I have worked for the Alberta government to deregulate the entire electricity industry in the province, a multi-billion-dollar industry from generation all the way to transmission and retailing. I've been through restructuring of government departments and ministries. I have gone through massive change exercise and partnerships with companies up in Toronto, partnering with huge companies in the United States and completely changing their business model. And those are huge, huge changes. Things you need to be able to have. Here's what I've learned. One of them is you have to have a demonstrated commitment to the change, even if you have doubt. Moses had doubt about what he was doing, but he had faith in God, and he made a commitment to God that he would do what God asked him to do to bring the Israelites out of Egypt. And he never wavered except once in that commitment. You have to have a demonstrated commitment to change, and you have to be able to lead change. People need to see your commitment. You got to have a strategy and a plan that's believable and credible. If you don't have a plan, then you just have a wish. And people will not see, the skepticism will come out in droves. Third of all, is that it's really important to understand that even though you may have come to the conclusion that the change is the good thing to do and you're committed to it, there are so many people that you're now going to get involved with the change who have not gone through that same process and that angst of deciding to make a change. And you got to have empathy for that fear and skepticism and work with people to bring them along. because you can't just issue a memo. You have to have patience for those who need time to change, to catch up. Not everybody moves at the same pace. Some people take a longer period of time to get on board. You got to be absolutely persistent against any challenges and setbacks to overcome them, and believe that if you're doing the right thing and that God is on your side and doing it, these things are capable of being overcome, and you will persevere and you will persist and you will succeed. The other thing is you have to have a high degree of tolerance for uncertainty. Every one of God's followers through the Bible, when they got the call to do something, never knew how it was going to play out. They just trusted God. So you have to tolerate and have a high tolerance for uncertainty of exactly how something is going to happen, which is tough for some of you leaders out there, because you're people that are either like to have good control of what you're doing, which makes you a good business operator, or you have a bit of a perfectionist streak and you really want to make sure things are going to turn out right and you don't like failure. Well, get over it, because if you're going to be making changes, you got to have tolerance for that uncertainty and know that you can't know everything that is going to happen. You just have to have faith that you will, with God's support, be able to deal with it. And you also have to have a real willingness to communicate frequently and authentically to the people that are being impacted and being involved in the change. It's communicate till it hurts, but more importantly, communicate honestly and authentically. People can tell when you're putting up the corporate brochureware. They can tell the difference between that and reality. So those are the kinds of things that I think are worth remembering, which is change is not only inevitable, but it's part of God's plan for us to become closer to God and to be able to bring others closer to God. We need to continually change what we're doing and listen to his promptings. We need to take a leadership role for that. We have to be honest, and we have to be aware that there are at least 4 key tools that Satan uses in our human weakness to prevent us from embracing change. And we, as leaders, help people to overcome those things. Now, I also promised you that I'd be talking a little bit about how to make those innovations work. Well, I'll tell you, that's an entire university level course, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through a fairly consistent path to say, here are the normal steps in being able to have a successful innovation. So let's kind of talk about the first few steps. One of them is you never start an innovation by having no purpose for that innovation. You got to define what you're trying to do. What's the need that you're trying to change? It could be transformative, or it could be something as simple as we have a problem and we need to fix it. Okay? So clearly define the need. It doesn't have to be, we are going to be a shining light on the hill by next year. It could be, you know what, we've got some unhappy people, and I want all my staff to feel positive about working for, a God-centered organization. So this is maybe where we define the need. Then we take a look at it and say, well, what should change? Not what can change, because everything is changeable, but what should change? So you tend to scope out what the innovation is going to do. And then you just generate ideas before you go on to anything else. And it's important to not edit any of those ideas, because even the craziest idea that comes out sometimes prompts a really good non-crazy idea to come out of the discussions. And I have watched this happen many, many, many times, where we're doing an exercise and somebody says something absolutely shockingly boneheaded weird, and everybody gives them a sideways glance, and there's this awkward silence, and then somebody says, you know what, maybe if we did this instead, and something really interesting comes out of that conversation. Because that's sometimes the way God works, right? It needs us to kind of break our normal way of thinking to be open to an idea that's really creative. Now, sometimes you have multiple competing ideas, and then you have to evaluate them and look at which ones look like they're viable and which ones are just not viable. Maybe you don't have the resources, maybe you don't have the money, maybe you don't have the time, maybe you just can't do it. Maybe there's a regulation in your local community that prevents you from doing it. So you look at those things and say, okay, why might this idea not work? And then look at it and say, are any of those problems fixable? If they are, then you have a good workable idea. So I'm going to kind of refresh you on this one. Generate idea, define what you're trying to do, generate a whole bunch of ideas, evaluate why you like them, but also why they might not work. Figure out if any of the not work parts can be fixed, and then reevaluate those ideas to see which one seems to have the strongest chances of doing what you want it to do. So if what you're trying to do is to improve the morale of your staff and make them feel good about working in a God-centered organization, figure out which of the ideas has the greatest chance of actually doing that. And then plan the steps. Now you're working towards from innovation to implementation. And planning is one of those things where it's not issuing the memo, it's figuring out what are the steps that have to be done and who has to do them and when do they need to get done. Part of that is figuring out who needs to be involved. And then break it down into steps. If it's a big change or a little change, break it down into steps and stages that are bite-sized. It's an old saying that says, old riddle that says, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer is one bite at a time, right? And so what you're trying to do is, if you're trying to build a change, break it down into steps. And if it's a really big change, you're going to have a lot of steps. Small, you might have one or two. And then after you think you've implemented the change, you're not done yet. Because what I find is that unless you have a plan to really support and sustain the change, people backslide. If you look at, if you want examples in the Bible of that, just read the Old Testament. You will find lots of evidence of people backsliding. You need to put a huge amount of effort to sustain a change. And as a leader of an organization, one of the biggest things, most successful things you can do to sustain change is to do the same thing that you used to do as a successful parent, if for those of you who are ever parented, which is to pay attention. Pay attention to what people are doing. The people that are trying to make the change work, to recognize their efforts, to praise them for making the effort, to praise them when they even have slight, small successes, not even just the big ones, to continue to encourage people and to mentor them forward in that change. Sometimes it's good to measure some of those changes and celebrate hitting some of those milestones. I don't know about you, but we have this organization called United Way that has this big thermometer when it does fundraising. And everybody wants to get to the top of the thermometer and reach the fundraising goal. And it's kind of a fun thing that they do. All of those things to recognize, to reward, to praise, to encourage, to support, to empathize with people. Those are the things in leadership that are some of the biggest things you can do to sustain change and make it stick, but also make it succeed. And if you've not done that in your organization, you'd be surprised at how powerful those tools can be in making your organization change gears and be something else. I one of the things I am blessed with in my practice now, which is different. So let me describe my practice prior to God getting involved in the business and becoming a partner in a very vocal partner in my business. Is I used to work with very large government organizations and Fortune 500 companies, and I would bid on pieces of work and get mandates and to go in and I'd be a fix-it guy. So if there was something horribly broken, I would go in and analyze it with a small team of guys, and we'd figure out what it was and we'd implement it. And at the end of the day, the biggest change that I could see was the executive team made their quarterly bonus, and everybody made more money and spent it on stupid stuff. Here's what I get to do now. I get to work with a lot of small business owners and medium-sized business owners who love what they do, often love the people they're working with, and are deeply, enshrined in the trade or the skill that forms the core of their business. But they get stuck because they don't have degrees in business. They don't have MBAs from universities. They don't have experiences in Fortune 500s. And they're sitting there and they get stuck. And I get to go in and work with good-hearted people that want to do good things and help them to get unstuck so they get to do things that they really want to be able to do. And I always help them to focus on the things that make a difference to people, to do good things in life, to go do good things with their business, to have values that they recognize, that they lean into, and that they make a priority in their business. And that we take those priorities of values and goodness and use them as tools for success in their business. And so for me, I get to do something pretty amazing because I listen to the need for change and I allowed God in to do it. And it doesn't mean that these things happen miraculously. Even for Moses, even for Jesus, there was a tough path to go down, and a lot of hard work and sacrifice sometimes has to be made. And yet, the reason we do it is because it's the right thing to do, and it turns into a greater good for not just ourselves, but for other people. And that's why we ultimately need to follow the path of innovation, but we have to embrace change. So that's kind of the message I wanted to share with everybody, and hopefully ignite a little bit of a passion for letting go of what you're currently doing and hanging on tight to something that may not be working well for you anymore, or has come to an end of its season, and to be encouraged and brave and inspired and educated a little bit to embrace the next stage of your personal life, but also your business life. And hopefully to be able to do that in a way that is pleasing to God and allows God to bless your organization so that you can bless others. So, Bob, thanks very much for inviting me into this group and having a chance to kind of share my ramblings and some of my experiences. And as I said, I've been doing this for a very long period of time. So if anybody wants to ask questions or make comment or kick off a bit of a conversation, I'm delighted to be able to hear everybody's thoughts.
Thanks, Pete. That was a great presentation. And it seems like it was so timely with everything that's been happening to us. If we're not in the middle of change, we're going to be, whether it's our personal life or spiritual life, our business life. So I really am appreciative that how timely this message is for our listeners and for the people that listen and catch our podcasts even after the time during the week. And you can go to our website, christianbusinessboard.com, and look at any of the previous presentations. Also know that you can go to info@christianbusinessboard.com and let us know what you need and what support you need and resources that you need. And we would love to help you with that, whether it's prayer, resources, follow-up, a personal conversation, that we are always open, because we are brothers and sisters in Christ that want to have that community aspect, and that's part of our vision. So I'm hoping you're writing your questions down in the chat room, and know that you can, we're going to have Pete answer some of those questions tonight. And our next time will be June the 20th on a Monday night from 7 to 8 again, and we'll be announcing our speaker. It's a pleasure to be in partnership with Christian Business Board in the Canadian Christian Federation. I never got that
Canadian Christian Business
Federation.
Canadian Federation, you betcha.
Canadian Christian Business Federation. Yay, we got it. Thank you so much. I great notes. I was taking notes all along, and I hope other people will as well. Let's get those questions down, and we will have Pete answer those questions.
Yeah, I have a question and a comment, Pete.
Hi, Deborah.
My name is Deborah, and I am the area director for a community of Christian healthcare providers in Western New York. And we're just right now signing a contract for our first office downtown Buffalo. And so getting physicians and healthcare professionals who are very, I would say, not quite visionary, but very distinct in what they do, and they need to be. You know, you don't want somebody in the operating room having some wild thoughts. But you did it a very distinctive, you laid it out very distinctively, the next steps. And I'm really, really grateful you're an answer to prayer. So I'm going to get these slides, and I think every one of those slides you can go so deep. So I just want to say thank you so much. God certainly provides with what just happened in Buffalo, and the need that I see for us as Christian business people, and for the organization I'm the director for. Change is inevitable. And thank you so much for guiding us tonight. I really, really appreciate it. God bless you.
My pleasure. And you know what? Change is not just inevitable. I have had so many experiences in my life where change has turned out to be an amazing blessing. You know, right down to the God pursuing me for decades before I, accepted Christ into my life. I mean, there was a change that was inevitable. It was pretty clear when I'm looking at the history of my life, but it was also an enormous blessing. And so everything that happens because God is prompting us to move in a direction. And it's prompting us to do something different, and to evolve, and to grow, and to do something that can please him, but also bring people into relationship with God. So change is a blessing, not just an inevitability.
Would you be willing, we just published, it's a little late now, but we just put together a brochure listing the reasons why we're opening an office and what would be accomplished. It's really short. Maybe if I could get your email, I'd love for you to just kind of critique it if you wouldn't mind.
I'd be happy to do that for you. Hang on, I'm going to put my email in the chat here, and you can just send it to me anytime.
Thanks so much.
Make sure I haven't fat fingered my own email, but I think that should work.
Okay, got it.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Pete, I agree with your statement that change is very often a blessing, but it's also particularly at the beginning, can be very, very scary, which is why faith is so important. As you face something that looks like it needs to change, and you haven't trying to deal with the uncertainty that you're facing at the beginning of it. Being able to rest in God's word, and being able to just trust that God is going to work it all out for good. Without that, change can be enormously frightening. And it probably is anyway, but at least you can stand on faith and on God, and trust that he's going to have your back.
It certainly takes an enormous amount of stress out of the process. For me, I know, and others that, are believers, that you're absolutely right. It makes it doesn't make it any less stressful in some ways, but it certainly makes it a lot less frightening, knowing that whatever is going to happen is God is by your side through it. And it helps for us to be able to do what we need to do. I'm sitting in a, before this session, we were talking about the crisis of faith that is happening across North America right now. And we're looking at statistics in Canada that are not different from the statistic in the United States, where church attendance is collapsing in many, many jurisdictions and many churches. And we're looking at up to 30% of the churches in Canada shuttering their doors permanently within the next 5 years. And I pray that doesn't happen. But if it does, we have to be aware that what God is telling us is that we need to change our way of reaching people. Mm-hmm. And we need to find a different way to reach and to minister to people and to bring them to faith. And I remind often my friends who are members of beautiful churches that have been around for many, many years and are the results of beautiful capital projects that have turned into stained glass windows and beautiful atriums and wonderful facilities. And I remind them that as lovely as those are, during Jesus's ministry, he did not start one capital project. He talked about ministering to people from hilltops, from where they were, and going out to meet them. And maybe, just maybe, God is letting us know that he wants us to do something a little different again. And coming from a northern country, just like, Western New York, around the Buffalo area, miserably cold. I can't imagine preaching from a snowy hilltop and having a lot of people come out. So buildings are usually, especially heated buildings, are useful for those purposes. Maybe there's something else that he's asking us to do. And so we look at change, and sometimes we wring our hands and going, "Oh, isn't that a terrible disaster?" And all it is change, and God's asking us to do something different. We need to find the blessing in it. And you're right, Bob. If we have absolute faith that God's in control of this world, and he only lets Satan wander around because he finds him useful from time to time, then everything that's happening is happening because it needs to.
Amen. Amen. Pete, do you have any favorite resources, particularly things that might be faith-based around leading through change? I've got a lot of secular resources, John Cotter's work around leading change and the Iceberg is Melting book, but those aren't particularly spiritually based. Have you come across any resources? We're trying to put together a library of recommendations for people that we can post on our website.
Well, first of all, I think everything is spiritually based anyways. No matter what book it is, God's got a hand in everything that we read. And if it's really good stuff, it's probably got a big hand in it. So, there's a, I can't remember the title of it, but I'll get it to you. There's one of my favorites from many years ago is about the Jesus Leadership Guide, or some title similar to that. And it was a pretty good read. It was easy. It was easily consumed, and there were some really good principles in that. And if I can get the right title, I'll get that over to you, Bob. But there's also one where, just from a detailed resource, there is in fact a compendium of about almost a 600-page document that the fellow that I used to love to get stuff from out of his European practice on change management. When he left the practice and decided to move in, like he completely left change management and moved to something else that was interesting to him, he took the entire change management document that his business used, and it was a very large change practice in Europe. And he decided to do something fairly radical, which was he published it for free. And I have a copy of it, and I'll send you a copy or a link to it, Bob, so that everybody can get it. It's a massively technical book, but it's well organized by topic area. So for him, he talks about different phases of change, and he also talks about different organizational challenges and styles and how change can be most effectively brought into those different nuances and types of organizations. And I found it to be a massively useful encyclopedic work of, you don't read the book. What you do is you use it as a reference, and it's very well written. So I'll share that with you as well.
Excellent. Appreciate anything you can send us. As an engineer and a project manager, I use lots of references in that exact same way to deal with specific issues or problems. So
there was also some good work that was done out of the University of Barcelona many years ago, which identified, I think, about 5 different organizational archetypes and the different types of change-related and challenges in those organizations. And it was a large document, but I do have the summary slide that has a table of all that. I'll pass that along to you as well. You'll find it amusing in some places.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Would like to make that available to our people through our Facebook or on our website. I love the illustrations that you had, Pete, because they could be used for business, a personal application, teaching us leadership and evaluation, whether it's church, business, personal, and even in leadership. What type of consulting do you do, and do you come across the bridge to the United States?
Well, I do most of my work now through Zoom and remotely anyway. So I have clients all over North America. And I used to do, when I was working with Fortune 500, I used to get in planes and go all over North America and into Europe. I did work in Germany. I did work in Italy. I did work in Spain before, did work in Australia. But these days I find that it's a lot easier to just fire up a Zoom call and talk to people. And after COVID, one of the blessings are there are a lot more people that are comfortable with that approach to connecting with people than I think ever before. So yeah, it doesn't matter where I work. Most of my work, my specialty right now is I only work with owners, and I work with owners of companies that are typically in the $2 to $30 million revenue range, so kind of small to mid-size. And I tend to focus a lot on construction, manufacturing, fabrication businesses, anywhere where people, get calluses on their hands doing their work, And part of that was because I grew up in a entrepreneurial family. My dad ran a equipment sales and service business, so I was sweeping floors literally at 5 years old to earn candy money, as Bob said. But I also learned how to strip down and rebuild carburetors and work with equipment and do heavy work. And my mom ran a strawberry farm, so I was operating light farm equipment and picking berries and doing stuff as well. So I always had a real heart for people that didn't come from an academic background. And I remember when I was in university, my dad was trying to figure out how to grow the business, and I came home one day and sat at the kitchen table, which is often what happens in family businesses. And I said, "Dad, you got to do X, Y, and Z. I learned this. It's a great idea." And he went, "Yeah, no." And we tried several times. And finally, my brother, who was involved in the business, he got it and thought it was actually a pretty good idea. And so the two of us ganged up on my dad and essentially made him say yes. And he said, "Yeah, okay, I'll let you guys do it. But," he said, "if you break anything in this business, you're putting it back the way you found it." And so we agreed to those terms, and the two of us implemented the ideas I'd learned in university, and business went up 30% that year. And at that moment, I realized that there are so many really good ideas that if you're able to practically apply them, that small businesses that are out there can really do well with them. And I've watched a lot of my happiest times is when I got a client to the point where he's reached where he wants to be, and there's this big smile on his face. I had one guy who we just retired him last year, and I met him 3 years ago, and he had a massive heart attack. His health was not good. He was working 60 to 70 hours a week, 7 days a week sometimes still. He had 30 employees, and they're all driving him crazy. and he'd gone, and his wife told him he had to sell the business. He got evaluated, and there wasn't enough money to sell out of the sale to be able to retire on. And so I ended up working with him for a couple of years, and not only did he sell it for what he needed to have a comfortable retirement on, sold it for $1 million more than that. And so when he got his last check, we went out, and his favorite little corner restaurant with also a mom and pop operation. He'd known the owner for years, and we sat down, and he had this big ass grin on his face, and was able to tell his good friend who ran the restaurant that he'd retired, and he was able to retire because he was buying lunch for his friend across the table, and that was me. And then that's the kind of stuff I just love to be able to do, and I get to do that more often than I really deserve it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I do.
Pete, thank you so much for sharing this important message with us tonight. And I don't see any more questions in the chat, so I'm going to wrap things up here and just thank everybody who was with us tonight, everybody who's watching on Facebook Live, and everyone who will be watching the recordings at some point in the future. We will be posting this on our website. It'll be on Facebook. It'll be on our YouTube channel. So, Pete, if we can get the PowerPoint slides from you, I'd like to post those as a handout for people to be able to download. And
happy to do
the
that.
other resources that you've mentioned, we'll put those up on our website as well and make them available to everybody who wants to see them. So we really appreciate your time tonight, and pray God's blessings over you as your business moves forward, and
thank you
as you continue to help people in both business and in their ministries through their business, Lord, and also the work that you're doing with the CCBF. We're just so grateful for that organization too. So we'll look forward to our paths crossing again through CCBF at some point in the future.
And blessings to you and your organization too. You guys are doing amazing work down there, and you're the beachhead for so much good that's about to come.
Thank you so much. Good night, everybody. We will see you next month on June the 20th at 7 o'clock. And we will be posting who the speaker will be at that point in time at some point over the next few weeks, hopefully.
Yes, we also post during the week on our Facebook page, Christian Business Board, so you can see different postings that we have, little 1-minute type things for you to jot down some things and some motivational, and just to know that you're cared for and prayed for. So check those out as well.